Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest in the series of performance puzzle webinars. I'm Gary Cookson, I'm your host for today, and we're here today for about half an hour. That's going to consist of me talking to you and interacting with you for about 20-25 minutes, and then time for some questions at the end. And for those of you who've joined the performance puzzle series before, I think this is about our seventh or even eighth one, but for those of you who are not sure who I am, I'm Gary Cookson. I'm an associate tutor with MOL Learn, who are providing this series. And you can learn more about MOL Learn if you go into the handouts section on your GoToWebinar panel. You'll see some information about the courses that MOL Learn provide. But I deliver some of their CIPD courses for them. But I also have my own business, a young and growing family as well. A lot of things going on for me, and I've got 20 years experience working in HR at very senior leadership levels. And in this series, what I try to do is show you some of the things that I think are important at really unlocking people's performance in the workplace, and we focus on a different aspect each time. So you can find out more about MOL Learn whenever you wish. There's stuff on their website that you can have a look at, but if you've not studied with MOL before, then do check out some of the information that they have. But what we're going to have a look at today is the performance puzzle. And normally in this, we go for about 20 minutes of me talking, interacting with you. So we're going to use the polls today. I'm going to ask you to put things in chat or questions, whichever's easier for you, and really give me your views on what we're talking about today. You can also use Twitter using the performance puzzle hashtag if you want to tweet along. We'll get through to some of the things a bit later on. And there's opportunity as well for you to ask questions as you go. And the performance puzzle series looks like this. So there's 12 things, and we're on number 8 today. So we're looking at meaning and flow, and we're looking at, in particular, because some of the earlier ones in this series have been more tangible about some of the policies, procedures, things you can put in place in your workplace. These ones, the next few, are about the culture, about what it's like to work in an organization and the elements that create high performance. And in particular today, we're looking at meaning and flow. So 2 objectives that I'm going to try to cover today. Firstly, try and help us to understand what flow is. We've all probably got a view in our head of what it is, but what is it and can we create it? How do we encourage it to happen? And then also we'll look at meaning and whether meaningful work is something that we have, and if we have it, what impact does it have on our performance levels and how we can create it for all our staff. So those are the things that we're going to be covering today. And feel free as we're going along to put things in the questions panel, and I'll answer those as we go along, but also use the chat panel too if you're able to, and give me some reactions and examples from your own work and your own life. We've also got some polls that I'm going to share with you as we go along, but other than that, I'm ready to go. So let's get started. So firstly, let's try and define what we're talking about here. What is flow? What is meaning? Difficult to grasp sometimes what these actually mean. I think we've all had them in our working lives, or at least I hope we have, but trying to recreate them, trying to describe them to other people, not easy, but I'm going to give it a go. So flow is often described as being in the zone. And when it happens at work, you have no concept of the passage of time. You can do things naturally and without great effort. I've experienced it, I have to say, much more in my sporting endeavours. I do a couple of different sports, and I've experienced it there much more than I have in work. And it feels like you can perform in your sport and win whatever match you're taking part in with your eyes closed. And I'm sure you've experienced that at work too. And maybe in your personal life too. Sometimes when you drive to work or you drive to a well-known location, when you get there, you've no recollection of the actual drive itself. That's because you were in the zone. You're experiencing flow, where you're doing things unconsciously. And because it's an unconscious thing, it's impossible to consciously create it. And there's our challenge. Because how do we do that in the workplace? How do we get our employees to experience flow so they're just performing unconsciously? Real challenge. It's also difficult to maintain it for any period of time. And if you can give me examples of when you've experienced flow, feel free to put these in the chat panel. When have you experienced flow, being in the zone? What's it been like? And if you can't use chat, then feel free to use questions. When have you been in the zone? What has caused this feeling of flow for you? And how long typically does it last? I'm saying that it's a short-term thing, but I think it results in vastly increased performance levels for individuals and therefore for the organisation. And one way in which we can create flow for people is to give their work meaning. So what's meaning? Well, meaning is about the work itself. It's meaningful work. It has a purpose, and the work itself is a motivator in and of itself. And I think that when you get meaningful work, it's a motivator, and therefore it's likely to lead to flow being created. And if you've got meaningful work in the work that you do at the moment, give us an example of what that is. Why do you consider it meaningful? So use chat or use questions or tweet. What is it about the work you do that makes it meaningful? Why do you get that sense of purpose from it? And then how do we create it? It's difficult to create meaningful work. It's great when we can do it. It's difficult to create it at an organizational level. It's even more difficult sometimes to create it at an individual level. So there's a couple of different levels to try and look at here. So two concepts we're looking at today, the concept of flow and the concept of meaning and how the two interrelate. So I'm going to open a poll in a second, and the poll's going to look like this. So just one question for you. How often do you feel in the zone at work? How often are you experiencing the concept of flow? And I'm going to launch this for you. So this should change your view imminently. Should see the poll open. Feel free to pick any of the options there, all the time, regularly, occasionally, or never. How often do you feel in the zone? I'll let this run for about 50 seconds or so, and then we'll see what people come back with. And I can see the results coming through. You can't see them yet, but they're quite interesting. So please vote. Almost everybody has voted. So I'll give it 10 more seconds, actually, just to see if the last couple of people want to vote. Question is, how often do you feel in the zone? Now, I think this is interesting because if I'd asked you outside of work in your personal life, you might have had a different response. And if you would have had a different response, then tell us about that in chat or in questions. Why might that response have been different? I'm going to share the results of this poll so that you can see them. So the poll results are on screen now. Look at that. Everybody's had it, but nobody gets it all the time. However, quite a few people get it regularly, so that's fantastic. But most of us are in HR or leadership positions on this webinar today, and so you would hope that we know what we're doing and we can get the concept of flow in our own work. However, can we create it for other people? It's difficult. Interesting if you can give us some examples in chat about what leads to flow for you, or in the questions panel, whichever's easier for you. What leads to flow or being in the zone for you? What is it about what you do? The best example of flow that I've ever experienced when I was working, I say when I was inside an organization rather than working for myself, is on your last day before a period of annual leave. Have you had this? On that day, because you know you're not going to be around for a week or more, you're really, really productive and work comes really easy. And I found I used to do some of my best work on my last day before annual leave. I wasted no time. I was assertive. I was completely in control. I could perform to the very best of my abilities without even trying. But, and here's the thing, at the end of the day, on that day, I was tired. And the following day, I would often get a cold when I went on annual leave. It was the same when I was at school. Whenever the school holidays started, I would always get a cold on the first day. So what does that say about flow? Well, flow involves adrenaline. And adrenaline is an important thing to have. But it can produce extraordinary results, but only in short bursts. And it can only be sustained for short periods of time, and it must end. And when it does, the individual's vulnerable to a range of things that might stretch to illness, but more commonly are no more serious than underperformance. And underperformance is serious in and of itself. So it's an interesting concept, is flow. We all know what it is. We've all had it from time to time, but we can only usually sustain that for short periods of time. And I can see Vanessa's telling us that she tells us she feels in the zone when challenged. And I think many people would understand that, and I certainly do. when you're challenged, you get that sense of adrenaline, but you don't want to be challenged all the time. You've got to have some downtime. So how do you sustain those levels of performance? You can't have constant challenge, even though you know that it works when you do get it. So let's move on. What does help us be in the zone? Here's some insight from a psychologist, and I can't pronounce the name of this psychologist, so I'm going to try and put it in chat for you so that you can see, and then you can research it separately. Mihaly is the first name, and I daren't even try with the surname, but he's a professor, and he tells us that there are 5 conditions for creating flow. And what he means by this is if you can get these things for people, then they are more likely to experience being in the zone. And there we go. I've put it into chat for us. Now I daren't even try and pronounce that surname because I'll get it wrong. There it is. You can look this up. So firstly, make sure people's goals are clear. Make sure people have got access to immediate and real-time feedback. Balance people's strengths with challenge. So Vanessa told us earlier on, challenge is important. Yes, it is, but only if you can respond to and meet and rise to that challenge. Create an environment where people can concentrate as much as they need to, deeply. And then support people to be in the present and be in the zone. So create the right environment for people. And I wonder, how many of these do you get when you're in the zone? How many of these? So please feel free, tell us in the questions panel, tell us in the chat panel as well. And I can see there's a couple of people whose hands are up. I'll be able to get to individual questions a little bit later on. But in the meantime, please interact using chat or questions, and I'll be able to deal with individual questions later on. So how many of these do you get? If you get all 5, you're in the zone. How many do your staff get at work? And this is an interesting question, because what I see is that not many organizations can give this all the time. So let's look at another poll which might help us understand this. These are the 5 things. Which of them do you think is the hardest to create in your organization? I'm not asking about why just yet, though you might want to explain why, but which of these do you think are the hardest to create? So I'm going to open this poll for us, and let's have a look at some of the responses. This will change your view imminently. So the poll's up and running. Tell us which of these 5 conditions for flow are the more difficult to create. So when that's up and running, please vote. Tell us which you think is the most difficult. And again, I can see the results coming through. You can't see them yet, but this is interesting to see because there's a real split here, which is causing me some distress because I was hoping that it was going to be 100% for one of the topics, but I'm going to just try and wing it and see what we get with this one. Why have I asked this question? I think flow is neglected as a source of motivation, not because organizations don't want to give people flow, but because organizations don't know how to, and many don't want the consequences of this. I have seen instances where all 5 of these things have been present. I've had it myself, but I wouldn't necessarily call that flow in the same way that I've been describing what flow is. It's kind of different. I've had these things, but it's not resulted in me being in the zone. And so I don't know whether there's a strong link between these things in the way that the psychologists that have been talking about thinks there might be. I think they do help performance, and I've worked in places where they've been present, but just not for everybody and not all the time. I'm going to close this poll in 5 seconds. So if you've not voted yet, please do so. There's a couple of people yet to do that. You've got 2 seconds till I close it, and your chance has gone. I'm going to share these results. Let's have a look at this. This is really interesting. Look at the split here. Look at the split between the different options here. And there's no clear majority with any of these things, which is really interesting. And I wonder why. If you've got an idea as to why your organization or you particularly are struggling with any one of these things, then please tell us in chat or in the questions panel. Tell us what makes that difficult for you. Because I think there's different things stopping each one. So the biggest one there is about balancing people's strengths with challenge. That to me is about getting the leaders right and making sure your leaders understand the people they're working with and understand what people's strengths are. So I'm a big believer in strengths-based coaching. And if your leaders have got that kind of mindset and skill set, they will be able to balance the strengths with the challenge. And I've got a couple of examples that I think might be helpful here. So I'm going to move on, close down these poll results. Again, feel free, keep putting the ideas into questions, the ideas into chat as well, and I'll pick these up as we go along. So an example, some of these things are brought about by great leaders. I once worked for a fantastic chief exec who encouraged all those 5 things for me, and I did some of my best work as a result. And the whole organization, I think, had some element of flow, but it wasn't an adrenaline type of situation. It was just that those 5 things were there, but it was driven by the chief executive. And when the chief exec left, he retired, so did the sense of flow and meaning for me and for many others in the organization. But even when I thought things were great and I was performing, not everybody shared that view. There were some people for whom, even if those 5 factors that we've been talking through were present, it made no difference to their level of performance. And I call such people wrong-uns, and there were a fair few of them. I've also worked for an organization where, from looking at those 5 factors we just shared, I know I had 4 of them regularly, on some occasions all 5, but not once did I think I was in the zone in that organization. Not once did I feel motivated. In fact, I felt completely demotivated, and that made me a wrong-un as well. But my demotivation stemmed from some past event where I felt completely devalued, having given my all for the organization, had it thrown back in my face. So even though I could have 4 or even all 5 of the factors, it made no difference. So my point on this is flow and being in the zone is not dependent on those 5 factors being present. But I don't think it could be present unless the 5 factors are there. And what I'm leading towards is I think there's probably a 6th factor. But the 6th factor differs for each individual, for all of us. And that's why we're getting some differing views coming through on the polls. And that 6th factor, whatever it is, we'll call it the X factor at the risk of infringing all manner of copyright things, is the key to unlocking motivation. But it's different. And if you know what it is for you, then tell us in chat, tell us in questions. But your view, your X factor is going to be different than everybody else on this webinar. I'm going to give you another poll to work through, another question now. The question is going to be this. This is about meaningful work. Does the work that you do have it? Now, there's 2 ways of looking at this. One is for the organization. So the organization provides a meaningful thing within its community or to its customers, but then there's your individual job within that. So 2 ways of answering this. So I'm going to share the poll in a sec and launch this so your view will change. So you've got the poll up and running. Does your work have meaning and purpose for either or both the organization and for you? And the reason why I draw that distinction, there's a Gallup poll that says there's a direct correlation between employees feeling a sense of meaning at work and retention, satisfaction, productivity, profitability. And if you can help employees connect with your organizational purpose and find meaning in your work, then arguably that's critical to the success of your organization. Most people voted now. I'm going to give it another 15 seconds or so for the last couple of people to vote. Now, the story that illustrates this is the possibly apocryphal one about John F. Kennedy talking to a cleaner at NASA, asking him what he did. And I think it's fairly obvious what he did if you're talking to a cleaner. Anyway, he did. And his response was, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Now, it's maybe an apocryphal story, but what we see there is an organizational purpose giving motivation to an individual despite the individual's job being reasonably unrelated to that purpose. Now, the individual might have got some of those 5 factors for flow, might have, and we don't know, but the organizational purpose was overriding. And that meant that meaning and meaningful work usually comes from the organizational purpose and not necessarily from the individual activity. And interestingly, our results in this poll back that up, because we're saying that for most of us, we've got a strong organizational purpose, and that gives us meaning. But a few people are saying it's only there in their job, but not for the organization. And most people are saying it's there for both. So that's backing up the thoughts that I had, really, that meaning comes from what the organization does, not necessarily what the individual does. However, you need to have those 5 or 6 factors present in the individual's job to get them in the zone, irrespective of the sense of organizational meaning. So I'm going to hide these poll results, and I've got a couple more points to make before we finish today. So let's do them. Now then, there's a nice slide. If you have an overarching organizational purpose, I think it's only, well, some people would say it's a short-term fix. You need to have a more pluralistic approach. And I don't really believe that. I think that I don't think it is a pluralistic approach. I don't think you need to see it as a short-term fix. I can usually find meaning in almost everything that I do, no matter what job I've had. It's a different level of meaning. I often tell the story of telling my 3-year-old daughter that my job was to help people be happy at work. And I guess that's what my meaning and my overarching purpose is. And when I've worked in places where I've felt a connection, it's usually because the organization's doing a similar thing, and they'll also let me do my thing without getting in my way. It's also why I dislike some of the more operational HR stuff, because they're very needed in organization, but they don't give me meaning. They're not linked to my purpose, but they do have a contributory hygiene factor. I was in my favorite job ever for 11 years, and that organization had purpose, and it was to improve the lives of its customers. And that resonated with me so much that we just understood each other and we had common ground. And I did my thing there for 11 years, but then the organizational purpose changed and I didn't have that connection, so I left. I've also been in other jobs where the organization and I have a complete disconnect about what they wanted me to do and what I thought was right to do, where my role was expected to be about compliance and regulation and nothing about making people happy. And I don't last long in places like that. I now run my own business, and the beauty of that is that I can pick and choose work that matches my purpose. So it's great. So I get loads of energy out of it, and I consider that I do some of my best work in the last 12 months or so because of that. So when you get meaning from an organization, you stay. People do. The search for meaning is a motivating factor, and it's a motivating factor in getting you to move to a different organization too. So I don't think that an overarching unitary purpose is a short-term thing. An organization has to be of sufficient size and maturity to cope with a pluralistic approach. But that's just a different approach. It's not better or worse. I think meaning comes from helping people, mine anyway, from helping people to be happy. It's made me join places, it's made me stay at places and leave places. It's also possible why my ideal jobs would have been a footballer for Man United or a wrestler in WWE, because both of those would have been about making people happy. And employee retention would be much easier if your organization provided a sense of meaning for all your employees and encouraged lots of different ways to get people into the zone. And the ways in which you do it: ask people, redesign work, redesign with the input of employees, and look at the 5 factors for flow to get the culture and all the surrounding activities right. But it's not easy. So my final thoughts are this: being in the zone is a contributor to high levels of performance. We know that, most of us get it. There are some common factors that you can use to create this. We've looked at 5 of those today and identified there's a 6th. It's an X factor. It's an intangible, individualistic one. Also key is having a strong organizational purpose to help motivate people, but it's not enough on its own usually. I think, and this is usually my closing thought in all these webinars, that if you have these adult conversations about what people want from work and treat people like grown-ups, then you'll unlock their performance. And so hopefully today I've given you some food for thought. I'm going to have a look to see if there's any individual questions in the questions panel. I can't see any at this point. I'm going to have a look in chat too to see if there's any there. And again, I can't see any at this point, but if there are any in the next couple of minutes, I'll be able to answer them. So please throw those into the chat panel or the questions panel. Otherwise, we're within a minute or so of finishing. I'll just hang on for another 30 seconds or so to see if anybody pops anything in chat or in questions. We've got something in questions. So Samantha's asked for a link to the rest of the webinars. If you're able, there is somebody from MOL Learn on the webinar today. They might be able to use your details to send you that. But alternatively, if you tweet at MOL Learn, they'll be able to send you a link to all the ones that have been recorded previously. And then the link to all of the ones that come up. We have them once a month, so we've got one in about 3 weeks' time. Otherwise, we'd be doing it on Boxing Day. And I don't know about you, but I've got other things to do on Boxing Day. Oh, Christmas Day even, actually, it would be. I'm definitely busy on Christmas Day. Any other questions coming through? Feel free to carry on this conversation with me after the event. We've covered a lot in this webinar, mainly to give you food for thought on a few different things. If that's been interesting to you, join us for the next one. Talk to MOL, learn about some of the things they do. Talk to me about this topic and other topics that I'm involved in. I'm going to finish now, so feel free to log off whenever's right for you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all soon.